I don't think so. The State Allocation Board has met in closed session today to hear on matters pertaining to litigation consistent with our notice agenda, and also to take personnel actions on item consistent with our agenda. And I would like, the board has asked me to announce that we voted unanimously in closed session today to appoint Ms. Lisa Kaplan as the new Assistant Executive Officer. Ms. Kaplan will serve concurrently with Ms. Ronbach through the end of November. And then beyond that, we're going to have a going away party for Ms. Ronbach, and then Lisa will be on her own. So hopefully the experience that Susan has had the last 5 or 6 months, I know she has a lot to share about what we can do to make the process work better, and I hope that you can work with Lisa on that. I, for one, will say that I am delighted to have had a chance to work more closely with you, Susan. I hold you in the highest level of respect, and I want to thank you for your willingness to serve this last 5 or 6 months. I think you've done a great job, and I really, really appreciate it. Thank you. Okay, our intention here is members are going to start leaving in about 8 minutes. So we're going to take up the non-controversial items, the consent specials, and Rob, we needed to move the regulations, right?
That's correct.
Okay, could you please present the consent specials, and we'll see if there's any opposition to the staff recommendation on those items.
Items 7 through 10 are consent specials.
Move approval.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to move the staff recommendation on items 7, 8, 9, and 10. Is that correct, Rob?
That's correct.
Is there any objection to that? All in favor? Aye. Okay, those have been approved. And now, Mr. Cook, what's the next item we must take up?
Turn your attention to tab 14, which is... Pardon me? Oh, so it's not working? Okay.
Yeah, it's working.
Yes, it was.
It was. You just weren't talking very loud.
Fine. I would turn your attention to tab 14. Okay, it's a deadline. I will just use them.
Is your switch off? You should not have it.
Good, good.
The system is... can you hear me?
Can you turn it?
Fine, I'll just turn it.
I know this was, at its time in '06, a very appropriate thing to do because we were worrying about how do you do the more underlying cost adjustments. We're extending it yet again. I perhaps can go along with it, but it seems to me it begs the question of solving the basic question, which is what about the propriety and the level for the other funding, which was the per pupil funding. This was intended to kind of be interim. It was intended to be a bridge. It was intended to facilitate the resolution of that. And here we are continuing it again, which means you're pushing off that harder decision. I'm conflicted about just doing it without a case being made, on the one hand, and number two, I hope it's not an excuse that we don't resolve the basic question.
You're absolutely correct, Mr. Harvey, that this was bundled in what was considered a grant adequacy discussion that that occurred, was very active around the authorization of Proposition 1B back in 2006, and it was meant to be resolved at some point sure that we're going to lose our quorum before we have an opportunity to present
Okay.
the construction grant.
We're not going to be able to resolve this issue today. Is there any objection to taking this up then? Because I think we're going to lose our quorum. Is there any objection to taking this up in our next meeting? Sure.
I certainly. Gentle discussion to our other discussion of how to make meetings go more smoothly. Rob, this is a general policy that relates to all schools that apply, not something that happened to a particular district. Is that correct?
That's correct. This is a specific grant that is provided to projects that are either new sites or are adding additional acreage to an existing site.
Okay.
So it's additional funding, and it is expiring at the end of this year.
Because it was an interim, and then we're talking about extending it while we consider something else. Let me just say that from reading the staff report, I couldn't tell that. Okay. And I do hope that when we have our discussion of the rules and procedures, one of the things I hope we can do is look at the board book and how we can get immediately an understanding, general policy, exception made, due to expire, why we didn't get it done, what's the problem we're trying to fix, because otherwise we end up wading through things that we don't understand.
Mr. Cook, before we continue with discussion on this item, is there anything else that we have to do today before we lose our quorum? Was there something else? Starting the clock, did we do that already?
We already did that. We took that action.
It's okay, so we can continue discussing this until we lose our quorum. By the way, for those of you here in the audience, when we lose the quorum, we're not going to adjourn. We are going to go ahead and have some more discussion, but we're not going to take any more actions. And we discussed that, and our colleagues here are okay with that. Do you want to continue? You know, we can continue discussing this item. I'm just not sure we're going to get to resolution in the time we have left.
We're putting it over. Why don't we move on to the other general discussion?
Can I just ask, though, if we put this over, for projects that come before the board in January, if we didn't take an action today, does that impact those projects in January, or would we have to concurrently in January also take up this item prior to taking up projects in January?
Yeah, this sunsets.
Well, we could take it up in January and reestablish it.
You would have to, well, for whatever period of time, you couldn't act during that. The regulation will sunset on January 1, so you would be starting over the regulatory process.
The regulation would
Well, that
sunset?
simply means we could re-adopt the regs and resubmit them to OAL, correct?
Yes.
That's a 3-month process or more. So for projects from January through March or April, any approvals would would be exclusive of this grant.
There wouldn't be any authority to approve because this
So it is
expires.
important that it's discussed today.
I can see Mr. Duffy is anxious to address the board. Tom, could you please
I will. Thank you, Mr. Chairman,
address
members.
us? Thank you.
Tom Duffy with Cash. I'd answer your question differently, Mr. Harvey. This came out of a study that we had asked the board to ask OPSC to do in 2005, 2006. It was a study that replicated a cash study that had been done earlier. And we found in working with OPSC, through looking at a lot of data, that in converting from the old program, the lease purchase program, to the current program, the general site allowance from the old program was left out. We asked that it be put in place, and the executive officer at the time moved this item forward. The board adopted it, but Ann Sheehan, who was the chair at the time, basically said, can we do this as an interim and just see what the impact of this is? We expected it last year to be done permanently. And so again, it's on for interim use, assuming that this could be looked at again. What I would ask you to do is to approve this, but have no sunset, because There was a study done by your staff that identified that the general site allowance from the old program was not included when the new program was established. So I would ask that you move it forward.
So Tom, Cash is asking for us to approve the sunset extension today, is that correct?
Yes.
And is that the staff recommendation?
The staff recommendation is to extend this for an additional year.
Okay. We still have a quorum. We could act on this item. It's what's the will of the board?
I move the item. Anybody second it?
We have
I'll
a motion
second.
by Ms. Fuller, a second by Ms.
Adopt the staff's recommendation.
Adopt the staff recommendation. All in favor? Aye. Staff recommendation on this item is approved, Tom.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Rob.
Mr. Executive Director, I would request that the underlying question that I posed be brought back within the next year. That is, if this truly was an interim, he's arguing that it isn't, but if it was an interim, and the grant question and the adequacy of the grant was kind of the threshold for this, I'd like to have that before us.
Well, and I'm sensing by our rapidly dwindling quorum that we'll be bringing up our new construction grant report at our next meeting, and we can expand on it a little bit at that time.
I'd appreciate that.
Rob, are there any other action items that we can take care of since we still have a quorum at this moment? Or are we pretty much taken care of them?
It appears that we have taken care of everything that you wanted left on the
Okay,
table.
I want everybody to know I had a discussion as we were coming out of closed session with Senators Lowenthal and Hancock, who've left, if they were okay with us having some more discussion on the scheduling issue with the full understanding that it's a discussion item and we're going to recalendar it for our next meeting so we can have the discussion again, because I know Senator Lowenthal particularly had some correspondence with me and had some specific ideas on that, but he didn't object to us having discussion. I know there are members from the school community here that may want to comment on that. So if there's no objection from the board members, Rob, can we go to that item?
Certainly. That item is under tab 11,
Okay.
and
This is a non-action
No, that-
item, correct?
I thought that was tab 17.
oh, pardon me.
It's tab 17.
Okay, here we go.
It is.
Yes.
This is a non-action item.
That's correct.
Is that right?
Yes,
Okay.
that's correct.
Could you please set the stage for this issue?
Certainly. In February of this year, through executive order, there were institution of 2 furlough days per month that were initially shutdown days on Friday, the first 2 Fridays of each month, and then later became self-directed. That also came with a reduction in pay for staff. And at the same time, we were also dealing with the rest of the financial crisis and a great deal of activity in our office trying to deal with that issue on behalf of school districts. In July of this year, a 3rd furlough day came into effect. And I can tell you operationally, our program, with those first 2 furlough days, we absorbed them, but it was a bit of a strain. The 3rd has really put us into a tough spot from an operations standpoint. In a 20 working day month, we have net about 14 working days between board sessions when we have to batch everything and be ready to go and done. You throw in a holiday or 2, and that gets reduced. And when you throw in 3 furlough days, we have net 11 days to actually try to manage the program proactively. In September, I proposed that there was as a possibility that if we were to shift to every other month meetings, we could regain some of that lost working time and try to accommodate the effective furloughs for the operation. And if you look in the lower part of this page, mathematically it actually works out quite well. A 2-month cycle in essence allows us to recapture the 6 lost days due to furloughs, and would, for the most part, restore us to where we were, at least we believe where we were as of December or January, December of this last year.
Rob, I appreciate what you're saying about the impact on OPSC, and for one, would like to be supportive of OPSC. But what benefits, if we proceed with this schedule, what benefits might the school districts, who are your customers, derive from it? And of course, we're going to hear from the school districts shortly. What concerns do you think they might have? And then from a board member perspective, why is it a good thing for board members? Could you maybe address some of those points?
Certainly. From a school district standpoint, there is a negative, and that is we would not necessarily be doing unfunded approvals every single month. And some districts are able to leverage those for interim financing, those unfunded approvals. Certainly in normal times that's been the case. In prior times when we've had a bond on the horizon and we've run out of bond capacity, folks have been able to use that to that state approval to go get interim financing. At the moment, I hope this doesn't sound too harsh, but I don't. The state's credibility on unfunded approvals is actually, in my opinion, quite weak. We don't. It's not a matter of bond authority that we've exhausted. It's our access to the bond markets and our inability to provide cash. So if I were looking at financing a project on an interim basis, I would be looking a long time out before the state might be able to participate. As far as a positive, having a little bit more time to actually be proactive in this program would be a benefit to all parties. It would allow us to work on the policy development that I know board members have asked us to tackle various aspects, whether it be seismic or high performance or what have you. That part of the program is suffering under furloughs. We don't really have that much effective work time to be able to apply to those, what I consider those high value opportunities. With this proposal, we would be freed up to be able to do a little bit more of that, and I think our staff has proven that we are able to bring forward pretty good quality policy development in this program, but we can only get so many things through the pipe at once. Just because of limitations. The other aspect is proactively resolving and solving problems so they don't become substantial issues before this board. And when we're able to walk in arm in arm with a district on a proposal, I think that's a benefit to the program and a benefit to the board. From a board member's perspective, we have a very busy board. You guys were up till 5 this morning. And there are times when there are policy deadlines and other deadlines where our members have a very difficult time actually making it, because they're either testifying or running committees, a very difficult time actually making it to the board. The proposal I have before the board actually would take into account the key policy deadlines in the legislature and provide a little bit of relief to our board members. Anyway.
We want to hear from any school districts that want to weigh in on this, or hear from Cash. I see Mr. Duffy. I see LA Unified's here. Please come forward. Mr. Duffy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members. Tom Duffy again for Cash. We provided a letter to you on this topic and had a number of suggestions. But just having dealt with funding crises in the 1990s, much like I'm sure some of Member Fuller did during that downturn in the economy, what we ended up doing in my school district was actually increasing board meetings, not decreasing them, because of the public interest in maintaining programs and not losing programs such as music and band programs. So we're not asking for more, but we would like you to maintain the schedule. it certainly could be that the board, as we suggest in this correspondence, could limit the number of items that may be placed on an agenda so that both the staff has less to prepare for and the board less to deal with. That is certainly one option. We also suggest a structure for appeals. This board is a hard-working board. We witness all the time you spent on appeals. You did it today, and we appreciate the patience and the forbearance that you have. It may be that if there was a specific structure, districts knew what the structure was, OPSC worked within that structure, it could be that that is streamlined as well, and we suggest that. We also suggest, and I think this is a perfect time, Mr. Chairman, you have Ms. Kaplan coming on board, new in her role, to be mentored for the rest of this month by Susan. It may be that the AEO could be used more often, more effectively in the policy role and also in the review of appeals before the board. I've worked with this board since 1980. The AEO that served in the position before Mr. Smoot served in the position dealt with policy issues and in fact presented those to the board. Something changed along the way. Mr. Smoot did the same thing. So it could be that you could ask to restructure how responsibilities are placed. So I don't want to belabor this, but just as I suggest in the final comment in the first paragraph, a public board isn't encountering the public if it's not meeting. The only way we can encounter you as a board is when you meet. I can encounter you each as individuals, and you may be sympathetic with an idea, but the action has to come by you being here.
Right.
So
Good
thank
point.
you very much.
Tom, may I ask you a question?
Yes.
Some have suggested that we meet every month, but just do a consent calendar every other month. We could have a report from the executive officer, move a consent calendar with the unfunded approvals or the apportionments if we have bond money. How do you think Cash would feel about that?
It is not as good as having a regular meeting, but if that's where the board needs to go, we would work with you on that, asking that we always have public comment opportunities if that kind of meeting takes place.
Certainly.
Okay.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Smoot, how are you? You're wearing my favorite tie. I love that tie, Lyle.
Thank you, sir. That's the only tie I own, so
Well, you've got good taste.
thank you anyway. Lyle Smoot, representing Los Angeles Unified School District. I think it's clear to say that we would be concerned about going to an every other month board meeting situation. However, having a meeting every month, 1 month being either like Tom Duffy's suggestion with a limited agenda, or just a consent agenda 1 month and a loaded up, however you want to phrase that, agenda
With
the
appeals
next
and
month.
specials.
I think we would probably say that, we understand the staffing problem. Obviously, 3-day furlough is not a good thing. So we want to see things continue. We wouldn't like to see the going to every other month because there's a lot of things that happen on the consent agenda. For instance, one of the things that you do on a consent agenda is you approve a district's new eligibility. That has to be done every year, and it isn't all done at once. It's done throughout the year. So those are things that, like for instance, Los Angeles Unified waits until we get the official word about what our eligibility is for the new year before we really start planning for what applications we're going to file and things like that. So the only thing I would ask is that whatever your decision is, it'd be nice to have an automatic readdressing of that decision in 6 months. But I think we would support going to,
Well, of course it was the-
consent only in 1 month.
Oh, well, thank you for that input. Any of these mechanisms are, I think, have the potential to provide some of the relief that the OPSC is looking for. We're going to have further discussion on this and hopefully a final discussion on this matter at our next meeting. But I would just note in response to your 6-month issue, which might be a perfectly good idea, that what's triggering this is the furloughs. And I would be the first to say that when the furloughs triggered off, we go back to our regular schedule because the days that OPSC has lost in processing time, they would gain back on the natural. So that would, I think, Mr. Cook can speak for himself, but I think that was his intent in suggesting this. Rob, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, this is something to deal with the extraordinary circumstances we're under, and
anyway, we need to find a means of accommodating things. I think the staff itself has gone above and beyond in many instances to try to overcome. We have folks that, you know, we have folks on the staff who come in and work on their furlough days, even now, trying to keep up because they're dedicated to the job, and it's not fair on my part to ask them to do more with less. So.
Thank you, Lyle. Do we have any other public comment on this item? Any board members want to weigh in?
We are going to put this on the agenda for the next
We
meeting
are.
and have a full discussion.
We're going to notice it right now. We'll put it back on the agenda. Do you want to
Nope. I'll
give us a preview on that robust
No,
discussion, Ms. Moore?
I'll give you a gift of no talking right now.
Okay. All right. Do we have any other? This is the last opportunity for the public for public comment at today's meeting. Is there anybody else who would like to come forward? Do we have any other discussion items, Rob?
No, we just have a few. We have a few reports. For example, a very brief report on legislation that was chaptered that affects the program.
Why don't we have the legislative report?
Okay.
Clear that off the calendar.
And then can I make a suggestion towards the end?
If you could turn to tab 18. We've outlined several bills that have been chaptered during this session and try to come up with the preliminary comments in terms of whether they would require regulation changes or policy changes that would come before the board. The first one is SB 592, which deals with charter schools. We do think that this would require some changes in terms of what we do now. I'm not going to go through all of them. I just want to list, highlight them. But SB 509, this changes the apportionments, when the apportionments are made for the deferred maintenance program. We don't think that we need to do any regulation changes for that bill. Senate Bill 334, we are still discussing on the impacts of this bill. We think that we may need to do some changes. Senate Bill 312.
May I ask a question on 334?
Yes.
That one seems very relevant to a discussion that we did put over on grant amounts. This looks like it adds a category to that. I would hope that when you bring the discussion forward, we will add this to the discussion as well.
This one takes it takes into account grant amounts that are done on or after January 1st, 2010. So the discussion that we were having today on grant adjustments is for 2009.
But we're almost at 2010. I'm suggesting that as this board wants a complete and full discussion about what it should do, if anything, on grant increases, this should be a factor because it's coming. In fact, we're not meeting in December, as I recall, which means we will be meeting in January. That would be the effective month and year of this. So I would respectfully request that if we're discussing changing grant amounts, and we all had this policy discussion, I think, a while back, that this probably was an inadvertent absence, that we should probably look at special education pupil needs at the same time.
We can certainly do that, Mr. Harvey.
I would appreciate it.
If I may, Mr. Harvey, the implementation committee, is it meeting in December?
Yes.
Will this item be discussed there?
At this point, we're not working on that. We don't have something ready to go to the December. Again, this was just chaptered this month.
That usually is, it is the implementation committee, and it's the implementation of legislation has been its always a historical base, and so it would be great if it could go to be discussed in December at the implementation committee, and then perhaps be at least part of the discussion in January when we discuss the overall grants as you suggest.
Well, I would hope we would discuss it in January, even if we don't get the implementation committee, because they certainly have the right to come directly to the board at any point in time, too. So if you can get it in December, and Susan, are you raising your hand to say, as chair, you might facilitate this?
No, what I wanted to say was that on the agenda for the December 3rd implementation committee meeting is the alternative education classroom loading standards, and I think that also gets into the issue of the adequacy of funding for the alternative education classrooms. So it's all related.
Oh, I see there's public comment. We'll get to you. Don't worry. Let's just. Is it on the legislation issue? Oh, please. Then please identify yourself for the record, and we'd love to hear from you.
I think you may have to come up here.
Ana Ferreira with the County School Facilities Consortium. We were the sponsors of SB 334, and we fully concur that the special ed issue should probably be added to as soon as possible to get a look at what the appropriate grant amounts should be on special ed.
Thank you very much, Ms. Ferreira. Okay, Juan, you had a couple other items.
Yeah, just a couple other bills. Senate Bill 312 is something that it requires the State Allocation Board as well as the State Board of Education to provide live video for the meetings. We've obviously already been doing this, so we're already in compliance. Senate Bill 130 deals with a particular school district and the selling of surplus property. We don't think that we need to do any kind of regulations for this. This bill did have an
I'm
urgency
sorry, Juan.
clause. Yes.
Let the record show that notwithstanding Senator Romero's fine legislative effort with SB 312, this body had the wisdom to start broadcasting our proceedings live months ago under administrative direction.
Yes. And then two other bills. Assembly Bill 1080. This deals with school districts that enter into leases and agreements relating to real property. We don't think that this would require any kind of regulations that we brought before this board. And lastly is Assembly Bill 333. This deals with tentative track maps and subdivision maps and providing extensions. We don't think that this also requires any kind of regulations or changes to our current policies or procedures. That
Does
concludes
that
the
conclude
report.
your legislative report? Okay, Rob, I think the witching hour is here. Is there anything else that we really must do? Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Duffy.
And I have a couple of items.
Oh, I'm sorry. Ms. Moore wanted to make some closing comments. You've been popular today, Tom. Please come forward.
Thank you. Just the question of the meeting. There had been discussion over the past couple of months of you meeting during the Green School Summit, and then other discussion, and you did have a brief discussion as a board, and there's been other discussion, but I don't know what your meeting schedule is. Can you let me know?
The Green School Summit was down in Southern California. I didn't sense from the board members that there was a burning desire.
I had the same sense, but
to do
two
that.
reasons to ask. One is we want to make sure that we know where you're going to be, so we're here with you. The other is the people that are organizing, and we're working with them. We're helping them with this. They've basically commandeered space for you, so I can tell them to let that go.
I think so.
I tried, Tom. I tried.
Well, yeah. I mean,
So our next meeting is January 27th. Is that correct? Is that clear?
Okay, it is January 27th. Okay, so
There
no
was-
Is
no
that
meeting
right,
at
Rob?
all in December.
That's correct.
do we feel that there's a compelling reason to meet in December? My sense is that, we cleared out the stuff today that we really had to. We missed having a discussion about the rules, which hopefully we will do in January. We didn't have as full and robust of a discussion on the schedule issue as we would have liked to have had because we ran out of time and lost our quorum. So we're going to come back to those items. And then I'm sure Rob will probably have, of course, we're going to have consent calendar, and we're going to have probably some specials and maybe some appeals too, right? We'll have a full agenda.
That's correct.
I'm sorry, and the new construction grant, well, that'll be a
The new
minor
construction
item.
grant item is certainly a very important one, and there's been a lot of work done by OPSC, and we've done work on this and communicated with you about that. Did
you want to comment, Tom? Did you want to comment on the study that was released, or did you want to?
I don't want to take more of your time, Mr. Chairman, but I just wanted to point out that we will now have gone an entire year without the adjustment, and the board is empowered by statute after January 1st to consider another adjustment. So just want to make sure we keep the 2 years separated, and we'll help with that.
Well, I'm glad you pointed out that we've gone almost an entire year without that adjustment, but I would point out for the record that didn't we make a 6% adjustment earlier in the year, Rob?
That's correct.
So we have, in fact, increased the per pupil grant by 6% this year, have we not?
That's correct, according to Construction Cost Index.
Yeah,
Right.
the
I know that was
CCI.
I know that was under a different regulation, but nevertheless, it's not as though we hadn't acted on the per pupil grant.
Just, and not complaining, Mr. Chairman, just wanting to identify that the study for current year for '09 was, I think, looking backward at '08, and we'll hopefully do the same thing.
I think you're making a
2010.
very legitimate point, and I'm really glad you did, because it would have been unfair for that not to have been on the record, which is it's not fair to come back to this issue and simply disregard we had a whole year go by. And I think, right, that's really what you're saying, right?
It is.
And
Mr.
you know what, Tom, for one member on this board, I'm in full agreement with you. I think we have to have a full discussion of that and take that into account, because I'm just a fair type guy.
And Mr. Chairman, I appreciate that, and I'm a fair type guy too.
Okay, good.
Thank you.
Good. Ms. Moore.
Yes, 3 issues before we close. One, really for the record, we are decreasing our board meetings this year by 1. As we normally would have met the 4th Wednesday in October, we did not. We met today in place of that. And then normally we have met as a board in November, December meeting. So we really are reducing this year by 1 meeting. So for the record, that piece of it.
Is that a concern for you, Ms. Moore? Or?
Only in the sense of that we do, I'm empathetic to both sides of this. I think the public needs to have access to the board, and I also am empathetic to the furlough days of staff. So I hope that we will have a robust discussion of that in January, but I am just noting for the record. And so I actually had an idea for the board around this issue, but the other, well, I'll just go to that one. There was a public meeting for the report that was done. It was fairly hastily noticed, and I think it's just due to the time that the report came out. Really, though, I know that the constituency appreciated the opportunity to have reviewed this the stakeholders a meeting before the board. I was wondering if it's possible to perhaps have another meeting where the report is explained to stakeholders, because I think a lot of people missed that because it was noticed on a Thursday, I think, and occurred on Monday.
How about, may I make a suggestion? How about we set that meeting up in December?
Yeah.
And we're going to have the implementation committee meeting in December as well. That's scheduled, isn't it?
That's correct.
So we're going to do IMP in December, and why don't we, I would concur with you, Ms. Moore, and suggest that we also hold a special meeting to fully vet and go through the report.
Yeah, I just think that will help the board when we consider this in January, if our public is more informed about the report. And I think, I think you did it was great that it was done on Monday, but I think a lot of people missed that because it was quick. Right. So would love to see the constituency be able to comment on that. Then 2 last things before we close.
Hold on, before you move on. So how do we make sure that happens, Rob?
Oh, that's easy. I mean, we will set up a meeting and we will notice it with at least 10 days in advance.
You'll put it on your website and.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Just wanted to make sure that was going to happen. Sorry, Kathleen.
And then 2 other things for January. The overcrowded relief grant, our last round of funding, our last round of applications is in January, with no notice of a round of applications in the future. I would like that the board is able to consider in January new rounds for the org program, just like we have extended it in the past, because there's still funding there. And I think that we as a board should consider whether we want to have more rounds of funding in the future.
And if you may recall our discussion around the last round of that, we brought forward regulations at that point in time to create additional funding rounds, and it was forestalled. I think I will lay this at Mr. Walrus' feet, but he addressed the board asking that these funds be on the table, if you will, for covering new construction shortfalls in the coming year.
Can I just ask that we put it on for the board meeting in January, and the board can discuss what the options are that they could do with it, if they
Certainly.
want to, if they want to reserve it out for future, or if we want to have rounds of funding for org. I'm going to be advocating for rounds of funding for org, but I think there's and I thought it took a 2/3 vote of the legislature to change that, if
Well,
I'm not correct.
If I can divine what Mr. Walworth was hinting strongly at, that's what he was intending.
Okay, so I just think it would be important for the board to discuss that in January, so that people know that and can plan for overcredit relief, that program, and so that they can know that there is or there is not going to be future funding rounds for that program. So that's another piece. And then finally, I continue to be deeply disturbed about the $17 million that is supposed to be in the emergency repair program. It was transferred by the Department of Education in July, and we have yet to see it make the books of this program. I think there's something wrong.
You know what? I agree with you. I'd like to hear from the Department of Finance. Could you please come forward? Remember, I wear two hats here, and so I'm wearing my chairman hat at the moment. But please identify yourself for the record and see if you can shed some light on Ms. Moore and mine, and I'm sure other board members' concern.
Sure. Nicholas Schweitzer with Department of Finance. It is our position right now that we do not think we have the legal authority to transfer that money into the ERP. So we've been working with the legislature to ensure that we acquire that legal authority to do so. So that's something that we've been ongoing for the last few months working with them on.
Can you elaborate on what a legal authority? We have previously transferred funds in this program this year. So can you please elaborate on what you mean by legal authority?
Well, the authority to transfer the money came in the prior Budget Act, which, Budget Acts are good for 1 year only. In the current Budget Act, there is no authority to transfer money, so we don't think that's legal at the moment, at this time.
As a follow-up, may I
Hold on.
ask?
For those, I'm not sure everybody got that, so I want to back up. You're saying that the authority to make this transfer was included as an item in the Budget Act of '08. Is that?
That's correct.
Okay, and that same item was not included in the Budget Act of '09?
That's correct.
Either what the governor signed into law in February, nor what was ultimately signed into law in July. Is that correct?
Correct.
I believe the transfer from the Department of Education occurred before the fiscal year end. So it was in play prior to the close of the fiscal year end. And I, for one, want to see that it is accounted for that way. So I'd like our attorney to look into the legal issue here. These are board funds, and they belong with the ERP program, and I believe they were available at the time that it was necessary for them in this program. So I would challenge that opinion and ask that our legal staff review this for the state allocation boards, knowing our perspective.
Ms. Moore, can you have, pursuant to your request, which I'm in full agreement with, can you have the appropriate staff from your department contact Mr. Schweitzer, and he will facilitate a meeting on this issue? Because we want to make sure that if the legal authority does exist, which Mr. Schweitzer is telling us it doesn't, if it exists, we need to make the transfer. And if it doesn't exist, then we're going to have to work with our colleagues in the legislature to get that authority. And so if you could follow up with Mr. Schweitzer, we'd appreciate that. Is that okay, Nick?
Yes, on both counts, we'd be happy to meet with you. And as I said, we've been working with the legislature to accomplish this transfer.
Thank you very much for your information today, and I think we have an action plan, and that I would ask that this be agendized for the January 27th board meeting.
Rob, please see to that.
Yes.
Okay, thanks, Nick. Was there anything more, Kathleen?
Those are my 3 items, and thank you very
Ms.
much.
Fuller, did you have anything more? Mr. Harvey? Any more public comment?
Very quickly, I know that I did not specify a date. I had some requests that things be brought back for discussion at this board relative to the financial hardship regulations and also the ability, if we have any, to marry the high-performance school bonds with the energy portion of that separate bond issue, knowing that there are covenants, there are statutes that may make marrying those funds and getting more bang for the green more difficult. But I didn't want to demand a date. Do you have any idea when either one of those two things will come back to the board?
Well, it sounds like we have a pretty full agenda in January. Actually, I mean, staff and stakeholders had done a substantial amount of work on financial hardship matters. Those could be dusted off and brought forward to the board in January. The question is whether we have a very full agenda or not, but I think that part could be done. I think, as Lisa's indicated to you before, she's looking into the matter on the energy funds. I doubt that will be ripe for January, but hopefully at the following.
Again, I wasn't asking for specific. Just to remind you that it was out there. I appreciate your working as hard to get it to us as you can. Thank you.
Okay, last call for public comment. Seeing none, the State Allocation Board is adjourned. Thank you. And if we don't see you before then, have a great Thanksgiving.